Hi boys and girls, so today we are going to read chapter 2 of Frindle by Andrew Clements. And chapter 2 is called Mrs. Granger. See? Mrs. Granger. Now Mrs. Granger, that name sounds like, let's see, can you think some words? Yes, like danger and ranger and stranger. I hope you were thinking of those words. So Mrs. Granger is going to be our new character, and so chapter 2 is called Mrs. Granger. So here we go. Fifth grade was different. That was the year to get ready for middle school. Fifth grade meant passing classes. It meant no morning recess. It meant real letter grades on your report cards. But most of all, it meant Mrs. Granger. So remember I told you that this book starts in third grade and it moves on. So we're already now in fifth grade. So let me read that paragraph again. I know I just read it, but it's important because I want you to pay very close attention about what it says. It says, fifth grade was different. That was the year to get ready for middle school. Fifth grade meant passing classes, so you go from class to class to class. It meant no morning recess, so no recess like we have recess at school. It meant real letter grades on your report cards. But most of all, it meant Mrs. Granger. There were about 150 kids in fifth grade, and there were 7 fifth grade teachers, 2 math, 2 science, 2 social studies, but only 1 language arts teacher. You see how at Lillian Street we have a lot of, we only have like 2 teachers per class? Well, Lincoln Elementary has a lot of kids, and therefore there's 7 fifth grade teachers. But there's only 1 teacher that teaches language arts. And language arts is like grammar, spelling, punctuation. So there was only 1 teacher for that. Mrs. Granger had a monopoly and a reputation. So what that means is that it says Mrs. Granger had a monopoly. What that means is that she's the only teacher for language arts. So no matter what, you were always going to get Mrs. Granger in fifth grade, whether you like it or not, because there's only 1 of her. So Mrs. Granger had a monopoly. She was the only teacher for language arts. Mrs. Granger lived alone in a tidy little house in the older part of town. She drove an old pale blue car to school every morning, rain or shine, snow or sleet, hail or wind. She had a perfect attendance record that stretched back further than anyone could remember. So that kind of tells me a little bit about Mrs. Granger. She's a very dedicated teacher. She's never absent. Whether it's raining or snowing or hail, no matter what, she's always there. She's a very responsible teacher. She must love teaching. Her hair was almost white, swept away from her face and up into something like a nest on the back of her head. Unlike some of the younger women teachers, she never wore pants to school. She had 2 skirt jacket outfits, her gray uniform and her blue uniform, which she always wore over a white shirt, and a little cameo pin at the neck. And Mrs. Granger was one of those people who never sweats. It had to be over 90 degrees before she even took off her jacket. So kind of let's visualize Mrs. Granger for a moment here. So she has white hair, so kind of tells me that she must be a little old. And it says that she doesn't wear any pants and she's always dressed nicely, but she only has 2 outfits that she wears. One is blue and the other one is gray. And she never sweats. Okay, so you kind of have a picture of her. She was small as teachers go. Oh, and she's also small. There were even some 5th graders who were taller than her, but Mrs. Granger seemed like a giant. It was her eyes that did it. They were dark gray, and if she turned them on full power, They could make you feel like a speck of dust. Her eyes could twinkle and laugh too, and kids said she could crack really funny jokes. But it wasn't the jokes that made her famous. I'm wondering, I hope that you're wondering, what made Mrs. Granger famous? It wasn't her jokes, and it wasn't, the way she looked at you. I'm wondering what made her famous. I hope you put that in your mind. Everyone was sure that Mrs. Granger had an X-ray vision. Don't even think about chewing a piece of gum within 50 feet of her. If you did, Mrs. Granger would see you and catch you and make you stick the gum onto a bright yellow index card. Then she would safety pin that card onto the front of your shirt, and you have to wear it for the rest of the school day. So can you imagine that? So if she caught you chewing gum, she got an index card, and she made you put the gum on that index card, and then she will pin that to your shirt, and then you had to walk around with it all day. Not only that, but you also, after that, you had to take it home and have your mom or dad sign the card and bring it back to Mrs. Granger the next day. And it didn't matter to Mrs. Granger if you weren't in 5th grade, because the way she saw it, sooner or later, you would be. So even if you weren't in her class and she saw you chewing gum, she will make you wear that gum, take a paper home to get a sign. Okay? She's tough, huh? I hope you're thinking about her now. So you have a lot of things to think about Mrs. Granger. What kind of character is Mrs. Granger? She seems very, very tough and very, very strict. All the kids at Lincoln Elementary School knew that at the end of the line, 5th grade, Mrs. Granger would be the one grading their spelling test and their reading test, and worst of all, their vocabulary test, week after week, month after month. Every language arts teacher in the world enjoys making kids use the dictionary. Check your spelling. Check that definition. Check those syllable breaks. Mrs. Granger didn't just enjoy the dictionary. She loved the dictionary, almost worshipped the dictionary. Her weekly vocabulary list was 35 words long and sometimes even longer. So I want to kind of stop here for a moment because I want you to think a little bit about the dictionary. We don't really use a dictionary as much anymore because we have the internet for easy access. Like if you don't know what a word means, you just kind of write, what does the word, I don't know, asteroids mean? And then it just comes up, right? It's very easy. But before, even some people still now, they get a dictionary and they look for the word that they need to know, and then they find a definition. And so to Mrs. Granger, the dictionary is very important because you can find the meaning of a word, you can find out how to spell a word, you can find out where the word came from, even how to pronounce the word, and it tells you whether the word is a verb, a noun, or an adjective. So it's very, very good thing to have, a dictionary. So to her, she loved the dictionary. But like I said, nowadays, people just kind of just look it up on the internet. They don't know what a word means. They just search for it, and there it gives you the definition. It tells you everything. So to her, it was very important. So let me continue. So she loved the dictionary, almost worshipped it. Her weekly vocabulary list was 35 words long, sometimes longer. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was a word for the day on the blackboard every morning. If you gave yourself a day off and didn't write one down and look it up and learn the definition, sooner or later, Mrs. Granger would find out. And then, just for you, there would be 2 words for the day for a whole week. Mrs. Granger kept a full set of 30 dictionaries on a shelf at the back of the room. But her pride and joy was one of those huge dictionaries with every word in the universe in it. The kind of book that it takes 2 kids to carry. It sat on its own little table at the front of her classroom, sort of like the altar at the front of a church. So let me show you. There's different dictionaries, different sizes, and so she has one for each of the students, but then she has her own, and her own is really, really big. And so here's a picture. It's black and white, so it might be kind of hard to see, but you can also see a little picture of Mrs. Granger there. You're gonna have to draw her later, but here's a little picture to kind of show you. So here's Mrs. Granger, right? And then here, this is the dictionary. You see how big it is? So there's the dictionary. There's Mrs. Granger standing in the back with her suit very seriously. But here's the dictionary. You see how big it is? Okay. So Mrs. Granger, so she had that in her classroom, in front of her always. Every graduate of Lincoln Elementary School for the past 35 years could remember standing at the table listening to Mrs. Granger's battle cry. Look it up. That's why we have the dictionary. So Mrs. Granger, if you had a question about a word, her battle cry would be, look it up. That's why we have the dictionary. That's what she would say all the time. Even before the school year started, when it was still the summer before 5th grade for Nick and his friends, Mrs. Granger was already busy. Every parent of every new 5th grader got a letter from her. Nick's mom read part of it out loud during dinner one night in school. So here's the letter that Mrs. Granger sent even before school started, which tells me that she's a really good teacher and she's really prepared and she's ready for the year to start because she sent a letter even before the year started. So here's the letter, and Nick's mom read it. And it goes like this. It's a letter from Mrs. Granger. Every home is expected to have a good dictionary in it so that each student can do his or her homework properly. Good spelling and good grammar and good word skills are essential for every student. Clear thinking requires a command of the English language. And 5th grade is the ideal time for every girl and boy to acquire an expanded vocabulary. And then there was a list of the dictionaries that Mrs. Granger thought would be acceptable for the home study. Mrs. Allen said, "It's so nice to have a teacher who takes her work so seriously." Nick, on the other hand, Nick groaned and tried to enjoy the rest of his hamburger. But even watermelon for dessert didn't cheer him up much. So Nick's mom was excited to get a letter from the teacher. That way she knows what she has to do. Nick, on the other hand, not so happy. He groaned and tried to enjoy the rest of his hamburger. Nick had no particular use for the dictionary. He liked words. He liked words a lot. And he was good at using them, but he figured that he got all the words he needed just by reading. And he read a lot, all the time. So this kind of tells me a little bit more about Nick. We know that he is a troublemaker and likes to get, teachers into, trouble, likes to annoy the teachers, but I can also see that he likes to read because it says that he got all the words he needed by reading, and he read all the time. So I'm getting to know him a little bit more. When Nick ran into a word he didn't know, he asked his brother or his dad or whoever was handy. And if they knew, they would just tell him. But not Mrs. Granger. He had heard all about her, and he had seen 5th graders in the library last year with their noses stuck in their dictionaries, like, oh my God, like, just trying to do their homework. Sorry, there's an airplane passing by. wait for it. And so he remembers seeing the fifth graders with their noses stuck in their dictionaries, frantically trying to finish their vocabulary sheets before English class. It was still a week before school, and Nick already felt like fifth grade was going to be a very long year. So that's the end of chapter 2. I don't think that Nick is looking forward to being in Mrs. Granger's class. What do you think? Just kind of from what I read, it makes me think that he's not really looking forward to this because of this dictionary business. So the dictionary is going to be a very important object in this story. So I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to think about, what do you know about the dictionary? Like, what are some things that we can find in the dictionary? So the dictionary is going to be very, very important in this story, boys and girls, okay? I know that in the front there's a picture of a pen, right? But the dictionary is going to be very important, so I want you to keep that in mind, okay? Now we know Nick, and we know that in every grade, right, he comes up with something. We know that in third grade, he turned the classroom into a tropical place, right, with sand and everything there, because the teacher, she was new, and so she didn't really know the rules. And then we know that in fourth grade, he came up with the idea of that chirping sound, remember, beep, right? And so now I'm thinking in fifth grade, I'm wondering, what is he going to do in fifth grade in Mrs. Granger's class? What do you think he'll do that is going to kind of, I don't know, let him, maybe he's going to get in trouble, maybe he's not. Is he going to annoy Mrs. Granger like he did the other teachers? What do you think is going to happen in fifth grade? So I'll leave you with that question. You can think about it. You can write it in your notebook. You can share it with your cousins, your brothers, your friends, and kind of think about it, okay? So that's the end of chapter 2. Tomorrow we'll do chapter 3, and make sure you answer the questions from chapter 2.